This is Rainy Night Horrors. Outside, the storm brews, and with it comes something darker. Every drop masks a sound, every shadow holds a shape. You're not imagining it. You're hearing the truth. Listen closely. It's already here. Elias Thorne. That's the name they call me. But what matters are the events of 3 weeks past, imprinted now on my memory. I must commit them to paper, capture the echo of her passage, the distinct shift in the very atmosphere she disturbed. Perhaps then, the telling will lend it truth. Dawn hadn't yet fully breached the city when I found myself adrift in the electronic currents of my inbox, precisely 7:30. The office, a cavern of synthetic quietude, hummed solely with the building's mechanical respiration and the staccato rhythm of my own keystrokes. Then, a peripheral shimmer, a disturbance in the static scene. I lifted my gaze from the screen's sterile light. She drifted past my doorway, a figure swathed in deep indigo fabric, a dress of severe cut, high-necked, close-sleeved, reminiscent of daguerreotypes from a forgotten century. Yet, it was the faint nimbus surrounding her, an ethereal phosphorescence at odds with the stark fluorescent tubes overhead, that arrested me. A blink, sharp and involuntary. The corridor stretched vacant before me. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. A clammy sheen broke across my brow. Pushing back from the desk, I stood, peering down the length of the hallway. Emptiness greeted me. The familiar monotony of grey carpet, sterile walls, sealed doors. Is anyone there? The query hung, frail in the stillness. Silence answered. Retreating to my station, my fingers trembled over the keyboard. Absurd, I chided myself. A misplaced tenant, perhaps, with an affinity for historical attire. Yet the air retained a peculiar density, a palpable weight, like the charged pause preceding a thunderstorm. The ensuing hour unfolded with predictable normalcy. Colleagues materialized, their arrival heralded by the gurgle of the coffee machine, fragments of weekend anecdotes, the jangle of telephones. The phantom nearly receded into the realm of imagined specters. Then, my monitor spasmed, a momentary flicker, yet enough to draw my eyes upward. She occupied the threshold. This time, her features resolved, youth etched onto pallid skin, eyes dark and profound, the gaze piercing beyond the physical. Her gown seemed to whisper with movement, though no sound reached my ears. A hand lifted tentatively, a gesture aborted. "May I assist you?" The words felt thick in my throat. Her lips parted, a silent "oh," before she pivoted and glided away, fabric swirling soundlessly about her ankles. I surged from my chair, nearly upending it, compelled to follow. Her trajectory led her swiftly down the corridor, toward the building's time-worn heart, the East Wing. Our offices consumed the 4th floor of the Ainsworth Tower, a grand edifice erected in 1902. While the West Wing bore the gloss of recent renovation, the East retained its antique soul, polished hardwood that groaned underfoot, burnished brass fittings. It was into this preserved past she retreated. I pushed through the weighty far doors, demarcating the wings. An abrupt chill descended, easily 10 degrees colder. My breath plumed, unseen, a physical impossibility in the lingering warmth of Los Angeles September. She rounded a bend ahead. I quickened my pace, almost running, but turning the same corner, I confronted only a blind alley of plaster and paint. She had vanished. Utterly. No exits, no alcoves. Merely an impassable wall met my searching gaze. Where she had last stood, I pressed my palm flat against the surface. It radiated an unnatural, biting cold. A vibration jolted me from my stupor. My phone. A message from Clara. Conference room. 5 men, donut bribe included. I retraced my steps, consciously regulating my ragged breath. The morning assembly proceeded, a drone of reports and projections, yet my attention strayed, my eyes repeatedly drawn to the doorway. My coffee cooled, untouched. Afterwards, seeking anchors in the known, I descended to the domain of Mr. Abernathy, the building superintendent, a fixture himself for 3 decades. If any law clung to these walls, he would know it. Mr. Abernathy, I began, the words feeling foolish. Forgive the strange question, but has there ever been talk of peculiar occurrences, specifically in the East Wing? He peered over his spectacles, abandoning his cryptic crossword, thick brows arching. Peculiar, Mr. Thorne. Define your terms. I recounted the morning's apparitions. As I spoke, Abernathy's initial air of bemused tolerance shifted, hardening into focused gravity. He laid his pen aside, leaning across the desk. A fire, he stated, his voice lowered. 1906. It began in the East Wing. Most escaped, but not all. A young woman. He slid open a deep drawer, extracting a substantial, leather-bound ledger, the tower's original annals. For posterity, he murmured, turning brittle, sepia pages. Ah, here we are. Eleanor Vance, 24 years old. He tapped a line of faded script. Employed as a secretary to the legal practice then occupying this floor. The accounts say she re-entered the blaze, attempting to retrieve vital case files. Her remains were discovered near the eastern staircase. A sudden parchedness seized my throat. Her appearance. Abernathy turned another page, revealing a mounted photograph, time-leached but distinct. My hand, resting on the desk, began an uncontrollable tremor. The woman captured there wore a dark dress with a restrictive high collar, her hair drawn back with uncompromising severity. Her expression was solemn, her gaze direct, unnervingly familiar. They were the eyes I had met scarcely an hour before. Returning to my workstation was futile, concentration fractured. An insistent sensation of being observed prickled my skin. Pockets of cold air materialized, dissipated. My computer became erratic. Documents snapped shut unbidden. The screen pulsed erratically. The cursor skidded with phantom agency. Around 3, seeking refuge in routine, I headed for coffee. Passing the break room, a distinct sound arrested me. Typing. Not the soft tapping of modern keyboards, but the sharp, metallic cadence of a manual typewriter. Click, clack, ding. I eased the door open. Vacant. Yet the rhythmic striking persisted for several heartbeats before ceasing utterly. On a nearby table lay a single sheet of paper, undeniably absent moments before. Typed characters, stark against the white, formed a message. The files must be saved. Please help me find them. My fingers trembled as I lifted the sheet. It felt tangible, ordinary, yet even as I held it, the letters began to recede, leaching away like evaporating ink until only blankness remained. That evening, long after the building emptied, I remained. An imperative drove me. I navigated the labyrinthine depths of our company's digital archives, hunting for vestiges of 1906, fragments digitized from decaying originals. As midnight tolled somewhere beyond the windows, my screen plunged into darkness. It resurrected moments later, displaying an unfamiliar folder, inexplicably open. Within resided scanned facsimiles of antiquated legal papers, all bearing the date 1906. The primary file read, Vance Estate versus Transcontinental Rail Corp. I immersed myself in the text. Eleanor Vance's father, it transpired, had perished in a railway catastrophe the previous year, 1905. The firm occupying these offices had championed her family's claim against the corporation. The suit alleged negligence, a cover-up of known track defects, evidence crucial to the case, scheduled for court presentation the very day after the fatal fire. The blaze consumed the originals, the documents Eleanor had perished attempting to salvage. Without them, the Vance claim disintegrated. The railway giant evaded accountability. A profound chill permeated the office. Overhead lights stuttered. The now familiar weight of an unseen presence settled behind me. Slowly, I swiveled my chair. Eleanor stood before me, her form possessing a startling solidity, less spectral than before. In her grasp, she held what appeared to be a worn leather portfolio, the kind once used for conveying crucial papers. You sought to reveal their deceit, I murmured, the realization dawning. To win justice for your father. A slow inclination of her head affirmed it, though her outline wavered, like heat haze on asphalt. But the proof, I counted softly. It was lost, consumed by the fire. There's nothing. She counted with a shake of her head, gesturing toward my monitor. I turned. New files were materializing on the screen, scanned images I hadn't summoned, internal railway memoranda, maintenance logs, inspection reports long thought destroyed. The truth struck me. Eleanor hadn't died trying to rescue the originals. She had died trying to ensure someone knew where the copies, secreted away for safekeeping, could be found. For the next 2 hours, driven by a spectral imperative, I downloaded and printed every page. The Transcontinental Rail Corp, I knew, persisted today, absorbed into a vast transport syndicate whose contemporary operations faced scrutiny. This century-old evidence of malfeasance would resonate now. When the last page emerged from the printer, the oppressive cold lifted. The air felt cleansed. I turned once more. Eleanor Vance stood near the doorway, transformed. The ethereal luminescence had vanished. An aspect of profound peace settled upon her features. She offered a faint, fleeting smile, dipped her head in a single nod, and then simply ceased to be. The following morning, encrypted copies found their way to investigative journalists at 3 prominent publications. Within a fortnight, the story detonated across the news feeds. The conglomerate's stock plummeted by nearly a third overnight. A cascade of class action suits is now gathering momentum. My habit of early arrival persists. Occasionally, a fleeting coolness brushes my skin, or movement flickers at the edge of vision, but the quality has altered. The presence no longer carries a charge of desperation, merely quietude. Sometimes deep in the evening's hush, the faint clatter of antique keys drifts from the direction of the rake room, a gentle nudge I've come to interpret, signaling time for rest. Last week, I relocated my office to the East Wing. Abernathy declared me certifiably eccentric. Few covered the drafty corridors and complaining floorboards of the old section. Yet, I feel anchored here now, Certain narratives demand their conclusion, however delayed, demanding justice echo across the decades. This very morning, resting upon my blotter, was a pristine sheet of paper. As I observed, faint impressions formed, coalesced into two words, then slowly dissolved back into the fibers. Thank you. The ephemeral script bore the unmistakable imprint of a bygone typewriter. That cathode ray tube surfaced from the basement gloom the previous Tuesday, a relic entombed in dust, draped in the lacework of spiders, precisely where it belonged. My folly was disturbing its slumber. Now, sleep evades me, sustenance holds no appeal, and the darkness behind my eyelids replays only the flickering screen, the horror it broadcasted, the entity now undoubtedly tracing my steps. This house, acquired through the sterile process of foreclosure, had whispered promises of sanctuary. 3 bedrooms, a pair of baths, grounds sufficient for quiet contemplation. The price, a consequence of the prior occupant's abrupt departure, vanished, the agent chirped, leaving their world behind. Felt like fate's compensatory gesture. 2 weeks prior, my signature sealed the pact. My initial descent into the subterranean level was pragmatic, charting territory for a future workshop. Then, the flashlight's beam snagged on it, a cyclopean eye of glass set in a coffin of faux wood crowned with skeletal antennae, a television from a forgotten decade, possessing the gravitational pull of a collapsed star. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, compelled me to test its pulse before consigning it to the landfill. 20 minutes wrestling grime and locating a socket yielded an improbable result. The power button clicked, the screen spat static, flared, and coalesced into an image. Recognition struck cold. The basement, my basement, yet not quite. The concrete geometry matched. The support pillars stood sentinel. The washing machine occupied its familiar corner, but this perspective was skewed, high, observational, like a spider's vantage. The appliance itself was an archaic model, and the date burned into the corner, 6 Nafshin, 1994, 3:47 a.m. The footage possessed the spectral quality of time-worn surveillance tapes, colors bled pale, details dissolving into grain. For minutes, stillness reigned. Then, a perturbation in the shadowed recess behind the washer. A hand unfurled, phalanges elongated, parchment-pale skin stretched taut over unseen bone. An arm followed, impossibly slender. A clavicle emerged. Ahead, the being hauled itself into the stark light, scuttling on 4 limbs bent at geometries that defied anatomy. Its cranium rotated, a full sickening revolution, keeping its face perpetually aimed towards the hidden lens. That face, God's, features smoothed over where eyes should be, a seamless blind expanse. Below, a gash of a mouth, stretching far too wide, bristling with needle-fine dentition. It crawled, deliberate and spider-like, towards the basement stairs. The feed jumped. A new angle. The living room. Timestamp unaltered. Through the nocturnal stillness of the house, it navigated, a predator mapping its domain, room by room, hunting. My thumb mashed the power switch. Futile. I tore the plug from the wall. The image held fast, luminous, and malevolent. The entity completed its ground floor reconnaissance, ascending. Another jarring shift in perspective. A bedroom Within the bed, oblivious, slept a man and a woman. The creature paused at their threshold, observing, its head canted at an angle that spoke of dislocation, and then it smiled. A surge of revulsion propelled me. I seized the television, hoisting its impossible weight, and hurled it downwards. The screen fractured, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from the impact, yet the nightmare persisted beneath the damage. And then, the thing on the screen turned. Its eyeless face swiveled, locking onto the camera's viewpoint, locking onto me. The smile widened, stretching, distending beyond all natural limits. Darkness swallowed the screen. Upstairs, behind the flimsy shield of my bedroom door, I spent the night besieged by silence and the phantoms it bred. Dawn brought a fragile courage. I descended. The television was gone. Only shards of glass glittered accusingly on the concrete floor, but its absence offered no solace. Now, motion flickers at the edges of my sight. At night, a faint scritching resonates from within the walls. Reflections betray me. Mirrors sometimes flash glimpses of a presence standing just behind my shoulder, pale, smiling. Last night, tucked away, I unearthed brittle newspaper clippings. June 15th, 1994. Local couple missing, presumed vanished. The names matched the deed. Before them, gone. And the occupants preceding them, the same silent erasure. The scratching intensifies. It emanates from the basement. I know its source, its patient vigil. I understand the sequence, the inevitable conclusion. Departure is not an option. The house, or perhaps what dwells within it, holds me fast. The lights just died. My phone is inert, a brick of useless technology. Footsteps, slow and measured, ascend the basement stairs, each tread a pronouncement. It's hunting again, like all the times before. If this message finds you, heed its warning. Avoid this place. Shun forgotten electronics moldering in shadowed cellars. Some darknesses are meant to remain undisturbed. The doorknob is rotating. Its silhouette creeps beneath the door. I can almost hear its smile. It has arrived. Forgive this haste, they insisted. A warning must be given. The horror from the screen, it propagates through the telling, an informational contagion. Awareness is invitation. It knows you now. I have sealed your fate alongside my own. Resist the urge to scan the dim corners of your room. Whatever you feel, whatever you hear, do not turn around. It's already there. Tuesday found Elias crossing the threshold, cordless drill clutched like a talisman, his mind a blueprint of sawdust and sweat. He hadn't anticipated the sudden strangeness that thickened the air in his own hallway, but the moment his gaze fell beneath the venerable curve of the wooden handrail at the staircase's base, the day fractured. There, nestled in the shattered underside, lay an unfamiliar constellation of markings. Gouged into the timber, they were crude, yet possessed a precision that bespoke intent. Elias crouched, the cool floorboards pressing against his knees, and brushed away a film of dust. Cryptic symbols emerged, stark, angular, belonging to no lexicon he recognized. They resembled haphazard scratches, yet coalesced into a pattern suggesting an archaic, deliberate craft. A constriction bloomed in his chest. He remained there, hunched by the steps, fingers tentatively tracing the incisions. The wood felt ragged, splinter-prone, exuding a faint, layered scent, old varnish mingling with something indefinably stale, like trapped air. A tremor ran through him, involuntary, which he hastily attributed to a draft slicing through an open window somewhere upstairs. He captured the markings with his phone's camera, a digital note for later investigation, then rose, setting the drill aside. A quick inspection of the rest of the railing yielded nothing similar. The upper surface gleamed innocuously. The spindles stood firm. A prank, he told himself, some long-forgotten whim of a previous occupant. Yet the glyphs lingered, unsettling burrs snagged in his thoughts. His agenda for the day was clear. Replace protesting floorboards on the landing, smooth over imperfections in the drywall. He tried to relegate the peculiar inscription to the periphery, but it pulsed insistently at the edge of his focus. Around noon, pausing for a hastily assembled sandwich, he found himself drawn back to the image on his phone. He zoomed in, scrutinizing the jagged lines, the shapes that stubbornly refused familiar classification. A disquiet settled deeper, twinned with an odd magnetism, a pull towards deciphering their secret. Futile online searches using keywords like staircase underside carvings returned only decorative flourishes, nothing akin to the stark cipher etched into his banister. He finished eating, the sandwich tasting like cardboard, and plunged back into the rhythm of renovation. As dusk began to bleed through the windows, he declared an end to the day's labor, retrieving a cold beer from the refrigerator and seeking refuge in the thrum of loud music. The following morning, Elias resumed his work, hefting a box of spare tiles towards the second floor. Halfway up the ascent, a sound snagged his attention, faint, ephemeral, like a rustle of dry leaves or a whispered syllable breathed just behind him. He paused on the stair, straining to hear. Nothing but the house's usual groans and sighs. He shook his head, dismissing it, and continued upward. Later, descending in search of a tape measure, he heard it again as he neared the bottom step. This time, it was clearer, a low susurrus that seemed to shape his name. Elias. The fine hairs on his arms lifted. Fatigue, he muttered inwardly, just exhaustion playing tricks. But the phenomenon persisted. Each traverse of the staircase became an exercise in strained listening, punctuated by faint murmurs, indistinct mumblings, and sometimes that chillingly familiar, almost admonishing whisper of his name. A dull ache began to reside permanently in his gut whenever he approached the stairs. His palms grew damp, his heart adopting an erratic, hurried rhythm. Stress, surely. The renovation's demands, compounded by the unnerving discovery of the carving. Yet the conviction solidified. Something was intrinsically wrong, centered on those stairs, perhaps emanating from the handrail itself. Friday evening found him ensconced in the living room, bathed in the flickering blue light of an old action film. A craving for snacks propelled him towards the kitchen. Entering the hallway, a sudden chill permeated the air, defying the thermostat's steady hum. The staircase loomed, familiar yet imbued with a new, watchful quality. Polished wood gleamed faintly. The usual subtle creaks announced his presence, but the silence felt unnaturally heavy. expectant. He fought the urge to retreat. As his foot met the first riser, a soft whisper called out of the quiet. Not words, precisely, but a low, mournful sigh. He froze, breath held captive in his lungs. Silence. Then, faint but undeniable, his name echoed, distant yet seeming to resonate from the very grain of the wood. Elias. His heart hammered against his ribs. A frantic scan of the hallway revealed only empty space. Swallowing past a sudden tightness in his throat, he forced himself upward. Each footfall seemed an intrusion, the thuds unnaturally loud in the charged stillness. His shoulders knotted. Reaching the landing felt like surfacing from murky depths, his breathing rapid, chest tight. He deliberately avoided the stairs for the remainder of the night, marooned in the living room until sheer exhaustion drove him towards his bedroom. He ascended quickly, almost scrambling, feeling absurdly pursued by an unseen presence. Sleep offered little respite, fragmented by dreams where his name reverberated endlessly through the hollow spaces of the house. Morning arrived with a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The stairs were unavoidable. After showering and dressing, he stood at the precipice, gazing down. The wood appeared mundane, the banister simply worn. He could pinpoint the hidden location of the carving beneath. Exhaling slowly, he began the descent, step by deliberate step. A low murmur surfaced, barely audible, but undeniably present. His throat felt instantly parched. Halfway down, the murmur elongated into a drawn-out hiss, like escaping steam. He nearly stumbled on the final step, his legs unsteady. Enough. The impulse surged. Rip out the entire handrail, replace it, eradicate the source. But a countervailing fear arrested him. A deep-seated, irrational belief whispered that removing the carved section might exacerbate the situation, might unleash whatever resided within. He didn't know what he truly believed, only the visceral dread the symbols inspired, a dread he hesitated to provoke. He retreated to the couch, staring at the staircase, his mind a frantic reel of possibilities. Auditory hallucinations, old house acoustics misinterpreted by a stressed brain. But the personal nature of the voice, the way it singled him out, felt chillingly intimate. He recoiled from that thought. A foray into the garage yielded a stack of documents left by previous owners, deeds, manuals, receipts, but no mention of stair modifications or strange occurrences. Restlessness gnawed at him. He drove to the local hardware store, ostensibly for supplies, telling himself he'd pick up a length of new banister wood, just in case. He wandered the aisles, collecting nails and spackle, the mundane tasks a temporary balm. But in the lumber section, faced with rows of pristine wood, he faltered. His hands clenched. A vivid image flashed in his mind. Prying off the old rail, a guttural roar erupting from the exposed structure. Nausea twisted his insides. He left the store empty-handed, the new railing unbought. Back home, a perfunctory lunch did little to settle him. He immersed himself in other tasks, patching plaster in the kitchen, wrestling with the dripping faucet, sweeping debris. Yet, his awareness remained tethered to the hallway entrance. Every passage prompted a darting glance towards the stairs, a low-grade pressure building behind his eyes, an instinct to keep watch. Late afternoon dictated another ascent. Documents awaited on his desk upstairs. He approached the staircase tentatively, one hand braced against the wall. Foot on the first step, then the second. His pulse thundered in his ears. 3 steps up, his name materialized again, drawn out, low-pitched. Alias. He went rigid, skin prickling. Turning back felt impossible. Forward momentum was a sheer act of will. His mouth was dust-dry, his tongue thick. A faint vibration hummed beneath his palm, where it rested on the banister. Reaching the top, he hurried into the spare room, shutting the door firmly behind him. Heart pounding, throat constricted, he threw open a window, gulping the cool air. He gathered the necessary papers, but lingered, postponing the inevitable return journey. Eventually, fading daylight forced his hand. Opening the door, he found the hallway hushed, shadows pooling on the steps beneath the weak overhead light. He swallowed, began the descent. This time, the voice was louder, rougher, like a muffled growl shaping his name into something broken and menacing. The hairs on his nape stiffened. He gripped the handrail for balance, recoiling from its unexpected coldness against the ambient warmth. He reached the bottom, practically bolting into the living room, legs trembling. He dropped the documents onto the coffee table, pressing his palms against his face, forcing measured breaths. The urge to call someone, anyone, surged. But who? Explaining the spectral harassment felt impossible, caught in disbelief or pity. A different resolve hardened within him. He retrieved a flashlight and a small, sharp chisel from his toolbox and returned to the foot of the stairs. Kneeling near the initial discovery site, he aimed the flashlight's beam onto the cryptic incisions. He would test a corner, see how easily the wood yielded. His hand trembled as he positioned the chisel. The light pressure produced a dry, scratching sound, like violating something resistant, private. A powerful wave of revulsion washed over him. Stop! His chest seized. Leaving the chisel resting against the wood, he backed away, retreating to the kitchen to wash his hands, as if cleansing himself of a transgression. Unease churned within him. He felt he'd brushed against a dangerous boundary. Hunger vanished, replaced by a hollow tension. Water felt heavy, difficult to swallow. Closing his eyes, he heard the voice again in memory, disapproving, laced with warning or accusation. His breathing grew shallow. He fetched a folding chair from the closet and positioned it in the hallway, facing the stairs. He sat, elbows on knees, simply watching the silent steps. The house settled around him, the refrigerator's faint hum, the distant sigh of passing cars. The hallway light flickered once, jolting his heart. For half an hour, perhaps longer, he sat in vigilant silence. No voice manifested, but the air felt thick, charged with an invisible tension. Finally, drained, he retreated to the living room's deceptive normality, letting the television's noise wash over his frayed thoughts. Midnight approached. The ascent to bed was fraught, the silence now feeling like a held breath, the sensation of being watched prickling his skin. He moved quickly, stumbling slightly on the landing. The following days brought no reprieve. The whispers persisted, sometimes sharpening, occasionally sounding like multiple voices muttering in concert, their volume waxing and waning unpredictably. His nerves frayed thin. A persistent ache settled between his shoulder blades. Food lost its appeal. The image of the inscription, became an obsession. The urge to excavate it warred constantly with the primal fear of unleashing something worse. One afternoon, while sanding old paint near the hallway entrance, the voices flared. Startled, he dropped the sander. It thudded against the hardwood, leaving a pale scar. He switched it off, the sudden silence amplifying the faint, sibilant chorus from the stairs. Teeth gritted, he marched to the staircase, deliberately placing his hand flat on the railing. The wood felt unnaturally cold, almost icy. He forced himself to slide his palm slowly upward along the banister's length. His chest felt tight, constricted. Hushed utterances followed his movement, like angry, liturgical chanting in an unknown tongue. Reaching the top, he snatched his hand back as if burned. His entire arm trembled. He retreated to his bedroom, locking the door, eyes darting nervously around the familiar space, breath coming in ragged gasps. Help was needed, but what kind? A contractor wouldn't understand spectral acoustics. Friends would likely suggest rest, perhaps therapy. He felt utterly isolated. It was barely past noon, yet exhaustion weighed on him like lead. He lay down, but found no rest. Evening descended. He decided to contact Leo, an old acquaintance with a penchant for historical oddities and arcane artifacts. A long shot, but perhaps better than silence. He texted the photo of the carving, asking vaguely if it resembled anything Leo had encountered. The reply was swift, but unhelpful. Something vaguely similar glimpsed in an antique store years ago, meaning unknown. Elias didn't elaborate, didn't mention the voices. Just curiosity, he'd implied. Perhaps an old family mark or code. Disconnecting, he glanced at the clock. Late. Hunger gnawed faintly. In the kitchen, he prepared a simple meal, eating mechanically, his thoughts circling back to the stairs. Would the voices intensify? Did the carving snake further beneath the treads unseen? Restlessness warred with a paralyzing fear of disturbing the wood. His fork trembled slightly in his grasp. Now, nightfall finds him rooted in the hallway again, the old handrail, a silent sentinel under the weak bulb. His body is strung tight, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The chisel lies dormant in its box, a temptation and a terror, ripping out the wood. Would it silence the whispers or unleash a roar? Would it sever the connection or shatter a fragile containment? The question hangs unanswered in the dense air. He retreats to the living room's relative sanctuary, the house settling around him with intimate creaks. His hearing strains against the quiet, waiting for the sibilant call. Tomorrow, perhaps. Tomorrow, the nerve might surface, the decision might crystallize, or perhaps fear will keep him tethered to this listening dread, this vigil. For now, there is only the waiting, the heavy silence, and the certain knowledge that something in the wood knows his name, and it waits too. The dissolution of my marriage left me craving anonymity, a quiet pocket in the city where the world's noise couldn't reach. That search led me to this apartment building, recommended by its manager, a Mr. Silas, chiefly for its vacancy and modest rent. He offered little else by way of description. My floor held several unoccupied units, their doors like vacant eyes. The hallways existed in a perpetual twilight, punctuated by the erratic sputtering of overhead lights, but indifference was my shield. I needed only a place to collapse after the day's labor. On that inaugural night, returning long after sunset, the scent of stale paint and ancient dust greeted me like a shroud. As I navigated the final turn towards my unit, a figure materialized from the gloom. It stood sentinel in the corridor, positioned against the wall directly opposing my door. It possessed a startling height, looming a head above my own stature, yet its silhouette lacked definition, shimmering at the edges like heat haze. No discernible features marked a face, merely a blur of profound darkness, an ink stain bleeding into the air. I halted, breath caught, keys clenched into a metallic fist. With unnerving slowness, it raised an arm, extending a finger towards my apartment door. No sound accompanied the gesture. It remained utterly still. A dry swallow clicked in my throat, a desert landscape where saliva refused to flow. The frantic drumming of my heart echoed in my ears. I forced a step forward, then another, my gaze locked onto the apparition. It held its pose, arm outstretched, finger aimed unwavering at my threshold. "Hello?" I managed, the sound thin, swallowed by the hallway's oppressive silence. It offered no reaction. My fingers, clumsy with dread, fumbled with the lock. The tumblers yielded, the door swung inward, and I stumbled across the threshold. A backward glance confirmed its presence, unchanged. I slammed the door shut, the sound unnaturally loud, threw the deadbolt, and sagged against the wood, lungs burning. The silence within my apartment felt dense, weighted. Moments later, peering through the peephole's distorting lens, I found only an empty, dimly lit corridor. The following evening, ascending the stairs felt like wading through treacle. An unnerving quiet permeated the building. No muffled televisions, no murmur of voices from behind closed doors. Reaching my floor, I scanned the familiar dimness. The corridor lights hummed their low, monotonous tune. As I neared my unit, it reappeared. Same precise location, same unnerving posture. A knot tightened in my stomach. I attempted to approach, but my limbs felt leaden, resistant. The figure's silent indication towards my door persisted. Though eyeless, the sensation of being scrutinized was absolute. I scurried inside, secured the lock, and performed a cursory check of my small domain. All remained starkly normal. The barren living room, the functional kitchen, the simple bedroom, just my few pieces of furniture and a small television set. A fierce desire to dismiss the encounter warred with the chilling image seared into my mind. Night 3 brought a variation. Returning late again, the corridor initially seemed empty. A fragile tendril of relief unfurled within me as I walked towards my door. Then abruptly, it flickered into existence mere feet away. A strangled yelp escaped me, and I recoiled, my bag nearly slipping from my grasp. It pointed. In that jarring proximity, it seemed taller, or perhaps my perception had sharpened. Its outline rippled slightly, suggesting a form not entirely anchored to our reality. I flung myself inside, the door slamming like a gunshot. Thereafter, I took to leaving lights ablaze throughout the night, a futile ward against the encroaching strangeness. Around midnight, the television in the living room clicked on unbidden, its screen erupting in a blizzard of static. I switched it off, Minutes later, it flared to life again. I pulled the plug from the wall. Later still, the insistent buzzing dragged me from a shallow sleep. The television glowed, mocking its disconnected state. Over the subsequent week, the anomalies intensified. A rank odor began to emanate from the refrigerator each morning, regardless of newly purchased groceries. Fruits and vegetables succumbed to a black liquefying rot overnight. Bread sprouted mold within hours. Milk curdled inside sealed cartons. Defeated, I resigned myself to nightly takeout, abandoning any attempt to store perishables. Whispers began to bleed through the walls, faint at first, like settling dust or the building's old bones groaning. Late at night, pressing an ear against the cool plaster of the bedroom wall, I could discern soft, sibilant murmurs. Not words, not language, just a low, continuous susurration that raised goose flesh on my arms. And every night, the shape manifested, always in the corridor, always beside my door, always pointing. Its presence thickened the air, making each approach a struggle against an invisible current. It remained impervious to my attempts at communication, a silent monolith. No breeze emanated from it, yet the space around it felt unnaturally cold. The thought of simply running past it occurred, but any attempt to close the distance resulted in a suffocating pressure in my chest, forcing me back. I sought out Mr. Silas the next day. His lobby office was dark, the door locked tight, the bell unanswered. Tentative knocks on a few neighbors' doors during the afternoon yielded only silence. The building felt deserted, a hollow shell echoing only my own movements. No footfalls in the halls, no life behind the doors, just me and the nightly sentinel. One evening, I lingered outside until true darkness fell, harboring a foolish hope that altering my routine might disrupt its appearance. But upon climbing the stairs, it was there, patiently waiting. In a surge of desperate frustration, I tried rushing it, charging forward to force a reaction. My outstretched hand passed directly through its form. An icy numbness shot up my arm, fading after a few seconds. The shape remained undisturbed, pointing. I stumbled, off balance, passing through its space, fumbled with my key, and tumbled into my apartment. Turning, heart hammering against my ribs, I found it somehow transposed to the interior side of the corridor, still indicating my door. The logistics were impossible, nonsensical. I slammed the door and threw the bolt, trapped with the inexplicable. A pervasive fatigue began to settle over me, accompanied by persistent headaches. Sleep became fragmented, shallow. The whispers within the walls grew bolder, occasionally resolving into near syllables just beyond comprehension. The television continued its spectral performances at random hours, the kitchen festered with the smell of decay despite my efforts to clean, the stench returning almost immediately. Air freshener was a fleeting floral lie. Eating out became the norm. I extended my evenings, haunting late-night cafes and dimly lit bars, delaying the inevitable return. But eventually, exhaustion demanded surrender. One night, I attempted to sleep in the living room, every light burning, the television physically removed from its outlet. Around 2 a.m, the familiar hiss of static jolted me awake. The screen glowed malevolently, plugged into nothing. My chest constricted. I scrambled up, yanked the useless plug again. Silence returned. As I sat there, pulse thrumming, a distinct creak echoed from the hallway. My apartment door swung slowly inward on its own. I was paralyzed. Framed in the doorway stood the shape. It didn't cross the threshold, but remained poised there, its arm now angled slightly, pointing towards my bedroom. "What do you want?" I yelled, the words cracking. Silence answered. Galvanized by terror, I lunged for the door, slamming it shut. As the wood met the frame, the shape vanished. The next day, I contacted the landlord. He spoke of lease breaks and substantial penalties, funds I didn't possess. Loan applications were denied. Apartment hunting proved fruitless. Everything decent was far beyond my means. My routine shifted. Leave before dawn, return profoundly late, minimizing my time within those four walls to the barest necessity of sleep. One evening, I tried a different tack. Calm reason. Standing in the corridor, facing the silent figure, I spoke steadily. "I understand you want me to go inside. But why? What's in there?" It merely pointed. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the apartment, deliberately leaving the door ajar. The shape remained outside, its gesture unchanged. Inside, nothing seemed amiss. The bedroom appeared ordinary. Bed, dresser, closet containing only my clothes. Utterly mundane. I closed and locked the door, baffled. The whispers seemed strongest near the bedroom wall. Sometimes rapping my knuckles against the plaster produced a strangely hollow resonance. On one occasion, I peeled back a loose flap of ancient wallpaper, revealing cracked plaster beneath. Tapping this exposed surface yielded a faint vibration, a subtle thrum, as if something stirred within the cavity. I resorted to calling the police. 2 uniformed officers arrived the following evening. As I opened the door to greet them, the corridor was conspicuously empty. Their inspection revealed nothing untoward. Old wiring, yes, but functional. No signs of forced entry. No lurking intruders. They departed, polite but unconvinced. Minutes after their patrol car pulled away, the shape reappeared, resuming its silent, pointing vigil. My phone's camera proved useless. Recording showed only an empty hallway. Sprinkling flour on the floor yielded only bizarre smears in the morning. No distinct prints. Offerings of food were either untouched and rapidly spoiled, or simply vanished. A night spent on a friend's sofa offered temporary respite. Returning the next morning, however, the apartment felt colder, the pervasive odor of decay significantly stronger. Dark, unfamiliar stains marred the inside of the refrigerator. Aggression proved futile. Swinging a broom handle through the shape met no resistance, only that momentary, violating chill. A powerful flashlight beam passed directly through it, illuminating the wall behind undisturbed. Curses and shouts were met with the same profound silence. Subtler strangenesses began to accumulate. Interior doors refused to stay put. The closed bathroom door would later stand ajar. A barricade of chairs piled against the front door one night was found neatly stacked back by the table the next morning. The unplugged television migrated from the living room to the kitchen overnight. My phone, left charging on the coffee table, reappeared on the kitchen counter, impossibly still plugged into a different outlet. Locked windows were discovered open upon my return. Removing bulbs from lamps didn't stop a faint spectral glow from emanating from them in the dead of night. I ceased consuming anything from the apartment. Tap water developed a stale, metallic taste. The bathroom faucet adopted a persistent, maddening drip that no amount of tightening could stop. The air grew heavy, perpetually damp, and smelling of earth and mildew, like a forgotten cellar. The building's profound silence amplified every creak of the floorboards, every breath I took. Sometimes I'd shout into the void of the hallways, just to hear a sound, any sound, but only silence answered. Leaving my apartment door open, I once tried to walk down the hall towards the stairs, seeking any sign of another resident. The shape simply manifested further down the corridor, always positioning itself between me and the exit, its arm redirecting me back towards my unit. Attempts to reach the stairs after dark became disorienting. The lights would flicker violently, and I'd inexplicably find myself back on my own floor, facing my own door, as if the building itself conspired to keep me contained. By day, escape was possible, but my life, clothes, belongings, the bare essentials, remained tethered to that space. I had no other haven. My ex-wife didn't answer my calls. Friends listened with strained politeness, their disbelief palpable. One visited during daylight hours, saw nothing unusual, and left before dusk. That night, the shape was back, pointing. Eventually, a weary resignation settled in. I stopped acknowledging it, stopped trying to understand. I'd walk past it without looking, enter my apartment, lock the door. I learned to ignore the putrid smells, the phantom static, the whispers in the walls. I dragged the television out to the dumpster downstairs. The next evening, it sat in my living room again, inexplicably returned. I emptied the bedroom, leaving only the mattress on the floor. It made no difference. Night after night, the presence pointed towards that bedroom door. One desperate night, I tried sleeping in the hallway itself, my back pressed against my apartment door, staring defiantly at the shape across the corridor. Hours crawled by. My eyelids grew heavy. A distant whisper brushed against my ear. A chill traced my spine. And when my eyes snapped open, the shape was closer, significantly closer. Scrambling to my feet, I flung myself back inside the dubious safety of my apartment. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, final surrender. I decided to leave it all. The deposit, the sparse furniture, the accumulated detritus of a life interrupted. The lease, the penalty, none of it mattered anymore. Packing a single bag with essentials, I waited for the gray light of dawn, the time when the building seemed most normal, the shape reliably absent. I walked out onto the street and did not look back. I never returned, never inquired about my belongings or the security deposit. Let them remain, artifacts in that suffocating space, presided over by the silent, pointing figure whose purpose I never learned. I didn't care. I was simply gone. This building, 4 stories of weary brick and sighing timber, felt like an extension of my own bones, or so I believed. Its stair treads groaned underfoot, its walls shed flakes of forgotten color, and the entrance door announced every arrival with a drawn-out moan. 2 flats per floor, corridors bathed in weak amber light, a place where anonymity was the norm, yet safety had always felt absolute, until the figure materialized before apartment 302. My first glimpse came through the pre-dawn gloom. My workday starts brutally early, often before 5:30 a.m. The lift, a temperamental cage of metal, was predictably inert, forcing me onto the stairs. Ascending towards the landing between the 3rd and 4th levels, I saw him, stationed near the threshold of 302, shadowed beneath a worn baseball cap, clutching 2 plastic carrier bags. His posture wasn't merely still, it was expectant, poised. I offered a reflexive, neighborly murmur. "All right, morning." Silence answered. He didn't stir, didn't glance my way. A statue draped in worn cotton. Perhaps headphones? I scanned for wires, buds, nothing. "Morning?" I tried again, louder this time. The silence held. A bus timetable tugged at my thoughts. Late already, I shrugged off the strangeness and hurried on. That evening, Silas, the night porter, unwittingly dropped a stone into the pit of my stomach. "Anyone finally take 302? I asked casually, sorting my mail. He furrowed his brow, a map of wrinkles deepening. "Nah, Julian. Empty months now. Owner's trying to sell, but no bites." "Why?" The words caught in my throat. I described the man outside the door. Silas looked baffled. "Odd. No visitors logged for that unit. Last viewing was ages back. Maybe another resident's guest got lost." I had no explanation. Murmuring goodnight, I ascended to my 4th floor flat. The 3rd floor corridor lay quiet, unremarkable. No lurking figures, no whispers from 302. Yet, as sleep refused to come, the image persisted. The cap, the bags, the unnerving stillness. Weeks dissolved into the rhythm of work, blurring the memory. Then, another Wednesday, another bleary-eyed 5:00 a.m. departure. Racing down the stairs, foggy from lack of sleep, I rounded the 3rd floor landing, and there he was. Same spot, same cap, same bags resting at his feet. This time, resolve hardened in me. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sharper than intended. "You live here?" No flicker of acknowledgement. His head remained bowed, the cap's brim obscuring everything above his chin. A faint, dull clinking emanated from the bags as he shifted his weight, almost imperceptibly. The sound of metal, perhaps tins. I stepped closer. "Is everything all right?" I enunciated clearly, needing to know if he was unwell, lost, something. Slowly, glacially, his head pivoted towards me. Beneath the cap's deep shadow, within the hallway's inadequate light, his face remained a void. Yet I felt the weight of his gaze. Without a sound, he took a step back, turned the knob on 302's door, slipped inside, and closed it. The distinct click of a lock, engaging, echoed in the stairwell. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through my gut. That flat was vacant, supposedly stripped bare, devoid of power. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. This was fundamentally wrong. I hesitated, torn between the urgency of my commute and the gnawing unease. Action won out. I clattered down to the lobby. Silas was settling in for his shift. Breathlessly, I recounted what I'd just witnessed. The man, the entry, the locking sound from inside 302. Silas shook his head, adamant. Impossible, Julian. Power's cut. Realtor left me the keys last month. It's gutted. Let's go see. We rode the groaning lift, its rattling cage mirroring the frantic rhythm in my chest. Squatter, intruder, danger. Sweat beaded on my palms. I wiped them uselessly against my trousers. The third-floor hallway was deserted. 302's door looked undisturbed, no marks of forced entry. Silas fumbled with his master keys, finding the correct one after a moment. He pushed the door open. Pitch blackness greeted us. Silas activated his phone's torch, its beam cutting through the gloom. The living area, barren. No furniture, no stray rug, just naked walls and sealed windows, curtainless and blind. The kitchen held only a disconnected, skeletal fridge. Both bedroom doors gaped open onto absolute emptiness. No sign of the man. No plastic bags. The thick dust coating the floor remained pristine, save for where we now stood. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I wandered through the space, opening a closet instinctively, flicking a useless light switch. Nothing. The circuit breaker was off, naturally. I met Silas's gaze. His usual composure was replaced by a clear discomfort as his light swept every desolate corner. Weird, he muttered. You're certain someone came in here? I nodded, my throat too dry for words. I mentioned the lock again. He tested the deadbolt from the inside. It turned smoothly, undamaged. We retreated, locking the void behind us, and descended in silence. Silas promised to monitor things, maybe ring the realtor. Work was a fog that day. The image of the man's slow turn, the finality of the closing door, played on a loop behind my eyes. From then on, the third floor became territory to be traversed with caution. My flat was on the fourth, but I found myself favoring the lift, even waiting for its sluggish arrival. If forced to use the stairs, I practically sprint past 302's door, eyes fixed ahead. Self-doubt gnawed. Imagination, a trick of the dim light, but conviction held firm. A few nights later, returning near midnight, exhausted and frayed from a demanding day, I found the lift predictably out of order. The stairwell fell deeper, the overhead bulb flickering erratically. Weariness made my steps heavy. A faint noise drifted from above. A single footfall. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, listening intently. Nothing. Just the building's usual nocturnal sighs. Paranoia, I told myself, climbing onward. Second floor landing past, then the third. As my foot hit the top step of that flight, I stopped dead. A distinct scraping sound emanated from within 3-2, like heavy furniture dragged across bare wood, except there was no furniture. My palms grew slick. An urge to flee warred with a morbid paralysis. Then another sound, a rhythmic tapping, soft but insistent, against the inside of the wall. The door, lacking a peephole, offered no clues. I edged a step closer, and instantly, silence fell. Pulse thundering, I bolted the final flight to my apartment, triple locking the door. Sleep was a restless battleground that night, haunted by scrapes and taps from an empty room. The next morning, I relayed the night's events to Silas. He looked genuinely troubled now, confirming he'd spoken to the realtor. No keys were missing. The out-of-town owner hadn't visited. No viewing scheduled. Silas offered another inspection. but the thought of entering that vacant space again sent a chill through me. "No," I said quickly. "Best just leave it." A new habit formed, listening. Every passage past the third floor became an exercise in strained attention. Sometimes, blessed silence. Other times, a muffled thump, a faint rustle like shifting fabric. Once, the distinct phantom scent of cigarette smoke, though the corridor was empty. I mentioned it cautiously to a neighbor, an older woman rarely seen outside her flat. She just shrugged, oblivious. A newer tenant, a young man recently moved in with his partner, reported hearing nothing unusual. The isolation amplified the unease. Was I losing my grip? One evening, determined to capture proof, I took the stairs slowly, phone in hand, voice memo recording. Holding it near 302's door, I strained to hear past my own ragged breathing and the low hum of the whole light. Then, subtly, a creak. Not the building settling. This felt localized, deliberate. The sound of weight shifting on an old floorboard just beyond the wood. My heart leaped. I retreated before anything further could occur. Later, listening back, the creak was undeniably there. Faint but present. Ambiguous. Perhaps explainable. Yet it chilled me to the bone. Not the concrete evidence I craved, but confirmation nonetheless. A few days passed. An early shift dragged me from bed around 4 a.m. Half conscious, rushing, I stepped out onto my landing and paused. Movement below, too early for most residents. I descended quietly, cautiously. Reaching the third floor landing, my blood ran cold. There, silhouetted at the corridor's far end by the weak window light, stood the familiar shape. Capped head, hands occupied. My heart seized. He remained utterly still. The faulty hallway bulb flickered, once, twice, and on the third blink, when the light steadied, he was simply gone. Vanished. A physical jolt, like an invisible blow, struck my chest. My breath hitched. Keys nearly slipped from my trembling grasp. I didn't walk. I fled, stumbling down the remaining flights. Reaching the lobby, I saw Silas at his post. Words failed me. My mouth was desert dry. A jerky nod was all I could manage before escaping into the pre-dawn street. Returning that evening, a sense of profound wrongness met me at the entrance. Mail collected, I headed for the lift. Miraculously, it responded. Relief washed over me as I pressed 4. The doors slid shut. The ascent began. Freedom from the third floor passage. But then, the lift slowed, stopped. The indicator glowed. 3. I hadn't pressed it. My stomach plummeted. The doors opened onto the dim, silent hallway. Empty. My finger jabbed repeatedly at the door close button. Agonizing seconds passed before the doors obeyed, sealing me in again. The ascent resumed. Only behind the locked door of my own apartment did my racing heart begin to slow. Since that night, avoidance has become my strategy. Cowardly, perhaps, but I take the stairs only in company now, or wait however long for the lift. If it halts unbidden on the third floor, my finger stays clamped on door close. I refuse to look, yet the sounds persist. Phantom footsteps pacing the corridor, a faint rustling behind the door, sometimes the metallic rattle of the handle itself. Each occurrence raises goose flesh. Old buildings creak, I tell myself. Old buildings settle. But old buildings don't house silent watchers who vanish into thin air. They don't unlock doors to empty rooms. They don't make you feel observed from vacant thresholds. Distraction is a flimsy shield. Work, chores, noise. The underlying tension remains. A friend suggested moving. Finances forbid it, and the idea feels like surrender. Yet every entry into this building is now an act of bracing myself, scanning corners, peering up the stairwell. Silas has accompanied me on further checks of 302, flashlight beams probing the same undisturbed dust, the same locked windows, the same barren surfaces. No trace, ever. But the absence of evidence doesn't negate the experience. It doesn't quiet the footsteps I hear late at night. It doesn't erase the fleeting shadow I sometimes glimpse near that door. There's no neat explanation. I wish there were. All I possess is this gnawing certainty and a route I tread with mounting dread. In an old building, avoidance isn't always an option. Sometimes the stairs are the only way. Sometimes I must walk that third-floor corridor where the man who shouldn't exist once stood. And each time my gut clenches, my skin crawls, and I hurry past, listening, always listening. Pretending 302 is empty feels safer, even knowing it's a lie. When the night brings those familiar, inexplicable sounds, I turn over, clamp the pillow to my ear, and whisper that it's just the house settling. Deep down, though, the knowledge remains. Something resides in 302. Something I cannot fathom and desperately wish to forget. The very air in Oakhaven felt wrong, thick and sweet, like spoiled honey, the moment our car breached its limits. Perfection radiated from the manicured lawns and freshly painted facades, yet beneath it pulsed a disquiet, a secret coiled tight behind every welcoming gesture. We hadn't known, stepping from our harried city existence into this supposed idyll, that we were exchanging one cage for another, infinitely more terrifying, its bars forged by the entire community. My wife, Clara, and I yearned for quietude, the relentless thrum of urban life having frayed our nerves thin. Oakhaven, discovered via a suspiciously inexpensive listing for a sprawling Gothic revival home, promised sanctuary. Its photographs depicted a hamlet untouched by time, steeped in tranquility. Our arrival unfolded on a sun-drenched Saturday, the moving van's engine a dissonant growl on the hushed main street. Figures paused their activities, turning with an unnerving synchronicity, faces splitting into identical, beaming smiles, hands lifting in practiced waves. This choreographed warmth felt worlds away from the city's detached anonymity. As we lumbered towards our new residence, a welcoming party had already materialized on the sidewalk. A woman, perhaps in her late 50s, her silver hair sculpted into an immaculate style, stepped forward, her floral print dress crisp. "Welcome, welcome to Oakhaven." Her voice was a melodic chime, her hand outstretched. "I'm Agnes, chair of the welcoming committee. We're simply thrilled to have new blood amongst us." I accepted her handshake, momentarily disarmed by the sheer force of their enthusiasm. "Thank you. I'm Elias, and this is Clara. We're looking forward to settling in." The remainder of the day dissolved into a dizzying ballet of introductions and unsolicited aid. Neighbors swarmed the truck, whisking away boxes. Casseroles appeared on the porch with alarming regularity. Insistent voices recounted Oakhaven's sanitized history. By nightfall, exhaustion warred with a fragile optimism. Unpacking consumed the first week, a period punctuated by relentless, almost suffocating friendliness. Someone was always materializing at the door, bearing muffins, offering guided tours. It was during one such excursion, led by our neighbor Silas, that the first tangible fissure appeared in the town's veneer. Passing the imposing stone town hall, I glimpsed a tight cluster of residents near the entrance, their heads bowed in low, urgent conference. Our approach scattered them instantly, their grave expressions snapping back into vacant cheerfulness with unsettling speed. "Anything interesting?" I inquired, aiming for casualness. Silas produced a laugh, a sound slightly too sharp, too rehearsed. "Oh, likely just hashing out details for the upcoming Founders' Day fair. We do adore our traditions here in Oakhaven." I offered a non-committal nod, yet the image lingered, a stolen moment of gravity quickly masked. Other oddities accumulated, conversations abruptly ceasing upon Clara's or my entrance into a shop, fleeting, knowing glances exchanged between longtime inhabitants. The peculiar fact that no one ever seemed to depart Oakhaven, not even for a holiday. One evening, roughly a month into our tenure, Clara and I sat down to a quiet meal. A sudden clamor erupted outside. Through the parlor window, we witnessed a young man sprinting down the cobbled street, his face a mask of raw terror. A phalanx of familiar townsfolk pursued him, their movements purposeful, almost predatory. "Elias, we have to call the authorities," Clara breathed, fumbling for her phone. Before the call could connect, a sharp rap echoed on our front door. It was Agnes, her signature smile stretched thin, betraying a flicker of strain. "Just a bit of local fun," she announced, her tone excessively bright. "A traditional game of tag, you might say. Nothing for you dear newcomers to fret about." We murmured assent, unwilling to cause friction, but the moment the door clicked shut, Clara spun towards me, her eyes wide. "Elias, that wasn't a game. Did you see his face? He was petrified." I couldn't deny it. The low hum of unease that had vibrated beneath Oakhaven's surface since our arrival was escalating into a distinct thrum of dread. The following day, driven by a gnawing suspicion, I ventured to the local repository of knowledge, the library. I hoped its archives might shed light on the town's peculiar undercurrents. The librarian, a gaunt woman named Elspeth, with eyes like faded ink, initially proved amenable, guiding me towards volumes detailing Oakhaven's founding myths. But when I probed for records of unusual occurrences, accidents, or disappearances, her affability evaporated. "I'm afraid access to those particular archives is restricted," she stated, her gaze flicking nervously towards a heavy, locked door behind the main desk. "By order of the town council. For preservation purposes, naturally. Feigning understanding, I retreated, but my curiosity was now a burning coal. What history was Oakhaven so desperate to conceal? That night, I recounted the encounter to Clara. She, too, had gathered unsettling fragments, snippets of hushed dialogues that died when she drew near the cafe counter, peculiar sigils half seen, etched into the lintels of older structures. Something is fundamentally wrong here, I asserted, the words tasting like ash. This transcends small-town eccentricity. Clara's agreement was solemn. A plan formed. The next town council meeting was scheduled in 2 days. We would attend, observers hoping to decipher the town's coded reality. The appointed evening found the town hall saturated with residents. Our novelty still drew glances, but the customary politeness remained firmly in place. The meeting commenced with predictable banalities, road maintenance, budgetary concerns, the upcoming autumn gala. Then, Magistrate Bellwether cleared his throat, a resonant sound that commanded absolute silence. And now, he intoned, we address the matter of the offering. A palpable stillness descended. Clara and I exchanged fraught glances, my pulse hammered against my ribs. An offering. As you are all aware, the magistrate continued, his voice smooth as riverstones, a decade has passed since the last observance. The time has returned to ensure Oakhaven's continued prosperity, its enduring protection. A low murmur of assent rippled through the assembly. Ice traced a path down my spine. The selection process is complete, Magistrate Bellwether announced, producing a folded paper. And I am privileged to confirm that our newest residents have been chosen to participate. Every head in the hall swiveled towards us. The smiles returned, but they were different now. Sharp, avaricious, hungry. Elias and Clara, the magistrate declared, his voice laden with a grotesque parody of warmth. Oakhaven is profoundly honored that you will join us in upholding this most sacred tradition. Before comprehension could fully dawn, iron grips seized our arms. We were hauled from our seats, the crowd parting like water before a prow. Our protests, our struggles, were futile against the collective will. We were propelled out of the hall, towards the dense woods bordering the town. Ahead, through the trees, flickered the orange glow of torches illuminating a clearing. At its heart stood a colossal stone altar, its surface ominously stained. What is this madness? I roared, twisting against my captors. What are you doing? Agnes materialized beside us, her face serene, almost beatific. Hush now, dear. It serves the greater good. Oakhaven thrives because of a covenant, ancient and binding. It keeps us safe, prosperous, but the covenant demands its due, a remittance every 10 years. The horrifying truth struck with the force of a physical blow. This charming hamlet, this welcoming community, a meticulously crafted lie. Beneath the quaintness festered a monstrous ritual, a pact sealed with blood, consuming untold lives. As they dragged us inexorably towards the altar, the townsfolk began a guttural chant, a language alien and disturbing. Their faces, once beaming, were now masks of fervent, terrifying devotion. Clara's eyes, wide with terror, locked with mine. In that shared glance lay a desperate resolve. We had to fight. We had to escape this waking nightmare. A surge of pure adrenaline fueled me. I wrenched free from one captor, launching myself at the man holding Clara, knocking him off balance. "Run, Clara!" I yelled, grappling with the hand scrabbling to reclaim me. She hesitated, a flicker of agonizing indecision crossing her face. "Go!" I screamed again, desperation lending my voice power. This time, she bolted, disappearing into the embracing darkness of the woods. As the townsfolk overpowered me, pinning me with brutal efficiency, I saw Magistrate Bellwether's face contort in fury. "Find her!" he bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip. "The offering must be completed." I was hauled onto the cold stone, my struggles rendered pathetic. Shouts and the sound of crashing undergrowth echoed from the forest. Clara was still free, still fighting. Agnes loomed above me, a cruel, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Do not despair, Elias. Your contribution will ensure Oak Haven flourishes, thanks to you. And your wife." She raised a gleaming, wickedly curved dagger. I squeezed my eyes shut, pouring every ounce of will into a silent plea. "Run, Clara. Escape. Tell the world." The last sound to pierce the chanting was a thin, distant scream, Clara's voice, laced with ultimate terror. Then a searing agony erupted, and darkness gratefully swallowed me whole. I wish that had been the terminus. My consciousness extinguished on that profane stone. Clara vanished into the world beyond Oak Haven's reach. The reality is infinitely more insidious. I woke in our bed the following morning. Clara slept beside me, her breathing even, peaceful. No wounds marked my body. No trace remained of the previous night's horror. When I tried, voice trembling, to speak of the ritual, the chase, the altar, she regarded me with placid confusion. "Elias, what are you rambling about? We attended the meeting, came home tired, and went straight to sleep. Are you feeling unwell, darling?" Days bled into weeks. Doubt gnawed at me. Had it been nothing more than a stress-induced hallucination, a horrifying dream? Yet the subtle tells persisted, a fleeting knowing glint in Agnes's eye as she passed our house, a freshly carved sigil, identical to the ones Clara had noted, appearing on an ancient oak deep in the woods. The way the townsfolk observed us now, their gazes tinged with a strange mixture of contentment and watchful expectation. We remain in Oak Haven, ensnared. Departure seems unthinkable, the roads leading out somehow always circling back. Each day unfolds with impeccable pleasantness. Every neighbor extends unwavering friendliness. But I perceive the charade now, the darkness pulsing just beneath the sun-dappled surface. I exist within the performance, counting the days, dreading the inevitable turn of the decade, wondering whose names will be drawn when the Covenant demands its next gruesome payment for Oak Haven's gilded prosperity. Should you ever find yourself drawn to a town whose perfection seems absolute, whose welcome feels too fervent, do not linger. Accelerate. Some secrets fester best undisturbed, and some idyllic communities are merely prisons with picturesque walls. Oak Haven's dark heart beats strong, and we, its unwilling participants, remain powerless within its rhythm. Safety, I thought, was woven into the very altitude of this place. The 10th floor offered a vertiginous buffer, a calculated distance from the terrestrial anxieties that scurried below. From this perch, the city was a breathtaking panorama, a sprawl of electric constellations. I adored watching unveiled, night after night, through naked glass. Curtains felt like blindfolds, but then came the presence, a whisper of form against the dark pane. Initially, a phantom born of weary eyes, a mere choreography of shadow and reflection. I was mistaken. What lingers out there, suspended in the urban void, is no optical illusion. It is substantial somehow, and it yearns for entry. 6 months I've called this tower home. It punctuates a relentlessly kinetic neighborhood, a place where the city's pulse thrums ceaselessly. Sirens and the blare of horns are my urban lullaby. I'm a creature forged in noise. My apartment, a modest configuration, 1 bedroom, a living space that merges into a compact kitchen and the slender exhale of a balcony. Access to this precarious ledge is via a sliding glass door, flanked by a window of equal stature. My preference for diaphanous curtains, barely substantial enough to mute the city glow, means nocturnal light spills inward, casting ephemeral hieroglyphs upon my walls. A strange comfort, that borrowed luminescence. Weeks ago, exhaustion clinging to me, like the stale scent of my office attire. Button-down, slacks. I was assembling a late meal. The kitchen's overhead glare threw the living room into soft focus. Plate balanced, I sank onto the sofa. That's when it happened. A flicker, peripheral, unsettling. My gaze snapped toward the window, probing the tenebrous space beyond. My building stares across an asphalt canyon at its twin, yet the gulf is absolute. No ledge offers purchase, no bridge spans the gap. A fleeting shimmer danced on the glass, headlights surely, crawling far below. I dismissed it, turning back to my cooling dinner. Only the refrigerator's hum and the distant circulatory roar of traffic accompanied my thoughts. Later, mid-ritual in the bathroom's sterile light, toothbrush poised, a sound pricked the quiet. A tap, faint, distinct, like a lone ice pellet striking the window pane. I padded into the living room. Lights blazed, illuminating the familiar vista. Towers ablaze, ribbons of traffic unfurling. No avian silhouette, no discernible cause for the sound. Wind, perhaps. The building settling its old bones. I extinguished the lights, retreating to the solace of my bed. The following night found me hunched over my laptop, engrossed in some document, the city's electric tapestry framed by the open curtains, the balcony door secured. Around the witching hour, a shadow traversed the glass, not the swift passage of a bird or debris, but something deliberate, unhurried. A disquieting thrum started in my chest. I rose, approached the window, scanned the void. Nothing. The balcony stood desolate. The air hung motionless, the thin curtains utterly still. a long moment I stood there, interrogating the darkness. No stray ropes, no forgotten scaffolding from window washers. A nervous laugh escaped me. Overwork, sleep deprivation, that had to be it. A few nights later, thirst dragged me from sleep near 2 a.m. Stumbling toward the kitchen for water, I entered the living room and froze. Against the window, stark against the city's ambient glow, stood a tall, dark cipher. My pulse hammered against my ribs. A figure, undeniably, yet devoid of discernible features. Then it moved. A slow lateral glide toward the balcony door, where it paused. The glass tumbler slipped from my grasp, landing soundlessly on the carpet, water blooming cold around my bare feet. A primal urge screamed at me to lunge, to wrench the curtains shut, but an indefinable quality about the shape, its impossible suspension against the glass, floating in the sheer emptiness, held me paralyzed. My hand began to tremble, a tremor that resonated deep in my gut. Breath hitched. I remained rooted, a spectator to this silent visitation. I perceived no eyes, yet the weight of an unseen gaze pressed upon me. After an eternity compressed into seconds, the shape drifted rightward, dissolving back into the night. I ignited every lamp, every bulb, bathing the apartment in harsh, artificial daylight. The remainder of the night was a vigil on the couch, television murmuring on low volume, a desperate battle against encroaching sleep. Dawn eventually bled through the windows, painting the city in reassuring hues. Nothing seemed amiss. The subsequent week saw dread become my nocturnal companion. Initially, I fought it, immersing myself in work, emails, calls, anything to avert my gaze from the glass. Stress, hallucination, I chanted inwardly, though a cold certainty refuted the lie. My mind felt unnervingly lucid. I began drawing the curtains, but their sheerness offered scant defense. Silhouettes still flickered, imagined or otherwise, through the flimsy fabric. One evening, the tapping returned, that soft, insistent percussion. I stood motionless, staring at the veiled window. "Go away," I breathed into the charged air. Silence answered. Then, the escalation. I was drifting on the couch, having forsaken my bed, phone clutched loosely. The television screen was dark, the apartment silent save for my own strained breathing. A loud creak tore through the stillness, the sound of pressure against glass. I bolted upright, heart seizing. Peering through a slight gap where the curtains parted, I saw it. A hand, pressed flat against the pane. It possessed a horrifying translucence, like skin woven from mist. The faint outline of splayed fingers, stark against the night. My body went rigid, scalp prickling, a cold sweat beading on my brow. A scream lodged itself in my throat, refusing passage. The hand lingered, an intimate violation against the barrier. Then it began to slide upward, leaving a faint, glistening trail, some viscous, otherworldly residue catching the streetlights below. I scrambled off the couch, fumbled for the nearest lamp switch, snatched a heavy monograph from the bookshelf. The impulse to hurl it, to strike the glass, warred with a deeper terror, shattering the fragile divide, inviting it in. I stood there, gasping, unsteady. Eventually, the hand withdrew, the shape it belonged to, melting back into the encompassing dark. I waited, eyes locked on the window, breath held for what felt like an age. 10 minutes, perhaps. Finally, cautiously, I approached the glass, leaning close, trying to quell the frantic rhythm in my chest. I examined the surface. Condensation slicked the pane, but marred by streaks. Fingerprints. Long, unnaturally attenuated, the geometry subtly wrong. My mouth was dust. "This is impossible," my mind screamed, yet the evidence smeared before me. The following day was a torment of replayed images, the spectral hand forever pressed against the glass in my mind's eye. Calling the authorities felt futile. What could I report? A phantom limb 10 stories up, building security. There was no physical access, no ledge, no earthly explanation. A break-in attempt with an ethereal appendage defied logic. A fragile calm settled for a couple of days. I attempted normalcy, the commute, takeout, mindless television, the pretense of sleep. But with each dusk, unease coiled tighter in my stomach. I left lamps burning. My gaze kept snagging on the balcony door, anticipating movement. The city's familiar clamor felt muffled, distant, as if the air within my own walls had thickened, become watchful. I resolved to fortify my defenses. A trip to a home furnishing store yielded heavy, opaque curtains, light-devouring fabric. I wrestled a new rod into place, hung the dense material. If sight was the conduit, perhaps blindness was the cure. That night, I sealed the window completely. Ensconced on the sofa, laptop open, feigning interest in some online video, I heard it. Around midnight, a faint scrape, fabric against glass, subtle, like a sleeve brushing the pane. My stomach clenched. I stared at the inert curtains, yet were they truly still? Tiny agitations rippled at the edges, as if the heavy material were being subtly manipulated from the other side. A dull ache began to throb behind my eyes. Rising, I approached, placed a hesitant hand against the thick weave. A faint, definite pressure met my touch, pushing back. Something leaned from the void. I snatched my hand away, stumbling backward, breath coming in ragged bursts. Trapped. Nowhere to run within my own sanctuary. Denial became my refuge. I retreated to the bedroom, locked the door, flooded the space with music, hoping to drown out the insidious sounds. Sleep was a fragmented, anxious state, haunted by visions of that translucent hand probing the fabric, seeking ingress. Morning brought temporary reprieve, the frantic escape to work, the forced concentration on spreadsheets and deadlines. But the sensation lingered, the feeling of that impossible weight against the curtain, yielding yet undeniably present. My friend Marco suggested drinks after work. I agreed too quickly, desperate for distraction, for the illusion of normalcy. I offered no explanation for my frayed nerves. He attributed it to work stress. Amidst the convivial clatter of the bar, nursing a second beer, the urge to confess, to spill the impossible truth, warred with the certainty of disbelief. He'd laugh, or worse, look concerned in that pitying way. I held my tongue. Returning late, slightly insulated by alcohol, I hoped for numbness. I illuminated the apartment like a stage set, checked the heavy curtains, and collapsed onto the sofa. A screech jolted me awake. The clock face glowed. 3:17 a.m. The sound emanated from the window, visceral, grating, like fingernails clawing at glass. The fine hairs on my arms lifted. My pulse became a frantic drum against my neck. I flicked on the lamp beside me. Silence fell instantly, Panic spiraled. Who could I possibly call at this hour? Forcing my leaden limbs to obey, I crept toward the window. The heavy curtains hung undisturbed. Reaching out, trembling fingers grasped the edge of the fabric. I pulled it back, just a sliver, heart pounding against my ribs, and peered out. My breath hitched, trapped in my lungs. The shape was there, pressed so intimately against the glass, its vague outline, head, shoulders, was discernible, limned by the city lights behind it into a halo of faint, grayish transparency. It seemed to waver, suspended, adrift in the night air. I let the curtain drop, my chest constricting. Its motives, its persistence, remained terrifyingly opaque. Stepping back, fighting for breath, fingers numb, mouth arid, I knew silence was no longer sustainable. The thought of abandoning my home was abhorrent, yet the fear was becoming corrosive. There had to be an explanation, a prank, a drone, some bizarre reflection. But deep down, the image of that hand, the feel of that pressure, refuted all rationalization. I retrieved a flashlight from a kitchen drawer. Tearing the curtains wide this time, I swept the beam across the glass. The shape evaporated instantly. I swung the light frantically, searching the exterior. Empty air, distant windows, no ropes, no platforms, nothing. Defeated, confused, I closed the curtains again, extinguished the beam. That morning, I contacted the building manager. I spoke vaguely of nocturnal disturbances, noises near the balcony. He sighed, admitted I was the third resident to report oddities recently. Others on upper floors mentioned flickering shadows, strange sounds. Maintenance had checked, found nothing loose, nothing broken. He offered platitudes, no solutions. My next step, technology. A small security camera, positioned on a table, lens aimed at the window. I set it to record, leaving the new, thick curtains open that first night, a desperate bid for objective proof. Sleep was a fraught affair, punctuated by phantom taps against the glass. Reviewing the footage yielded only frustration. The reflection of my living room stared back, unchanging, until around 2 a.m. Then a flicker, digital snow, a momentary blackout before the image returned. Nothing visible outside, just the impenetrable dark. Night after night, the same result. Adjusting angles, lighting, useless. Whenever a noise startled me, whenever I sensed movement, the recording dissolved into interference. As if the entity knew, as if it refused capture. A siege mentality took hold. I felt cornered, my sanity fraying, my evidence spectral. Every creak of the building became a potential intrusion. 2 nights ago, the sound was unmistakable, a sharp crack, not shattering, but the distinct report of stressed glass giving way. I scrambled to the window. A thin fracture spiderwebbed from the edge of the frame, and behind it, the shape, pressing, exerting palpable force. That hand, again, a pale silhouette against the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. Phone in hand, poised to dial emergency services, I hesitated. Too late. By the time anyone arrived, it would be gone. What then? Explain the crack? Mention the ghost? Horror kept me rooted as the fracture propagated slightly. Then abruptly, the pressure eased. The shape recoiled. The glass fell silent. Trembling, I approached, touched the cold pane beside the nascent crack. The lines were fine, sharp. The shape hovered briefly, a final silent observation before dissolving once more into the night. So now I sit, lights blazing, curtains drawn tight. Sleep is a forgotten country. A repair service is scheduled for the morning to mend the fractured glass, but the fear gnaws. What if it pushes harder next time? What if the barrier fails? What happens when it gains entry? The thought twists my insides. To be hunted in one's own home. It's an inversion of all that should be secure. Fleeing feels like surrender, yet staying feels like madness. Perhaps Marco's couch for a night, but the image of my empty apartment, vulnerable, visited in my absence. No, for now, I remain. Typing this feels like a small act of defiance, or perhaps desperation. My eyes dart constantly to the window, though nothing is visible beyond the heavy fabric. I feel its presence out there, patient, observant, waiting. My pulse refuses to steady. Every settling groan of the building is a potential touch, a prelude. Safety feels like a distant memory. Closing my eyes brings only one image, that translucent hand, reaching, pressing, testing the fragile boundary between its world and mine. Is it there now? Is the glass holding? Or will the next glance reveal only open air and the long fall below? The antique key groaned within the lock, a metallic sigh before the tumblers yielded. I nudged the immense shadowed weight of the oak door inward, my gesture encompassing the cavernous space beyond. "Please, Mr. Thorne," I offered, the smile meticulously crafted, a shield against the day's dwindling prospects. Crossing that threshold felt less like entering a house and more like stepping into a waiting mouth, unaware that it would soon clamp shut, testing the very marrow of my will to live. I am Elara Vance, a name whispered with a certain respect in the city's property circles. My portfolio boasts hundreds of transactions, from jewel box apartments gleaming downtown to sprawling suburban sanctuaries. Yet this place, this Leviathan Victorian, perched precariously on the town's frayed edge, possessed a gravity all its own. Years it had languished, a monument to neglect, its price plummeting like a stone in water as successive owners fled its oppressive embrace. But I perceived the dormant grandeur beneath the decay, the architectural ghost yearning for resurrection, and I vowed to be the agent who finally brokered its peace. Mr. Thorne materialized from the digital ether, an unexpected inquiry piercing the silence surrounding the property. His interest, voiced despite the house's notorious reputation, was peculiar. He was a study in sharp angles, tall, almost unnaturally lean, with eyes that seemed to bore directly into you, bypassing pleasantries. His smile was a fleeting curvature of the lips, never quite igniting the chill landscape of his gaze. Still, in this parched market, discernment felt like a luxury, and the siren song of commission drowned out the whispers of caution. The foyer greeted us not with welcome, but with the dense, cloying perfume of abandonment. Dust motes, gilded by the weak afternoon sun slanting through filth-streaked panes, performed a silent ballet in the stagnant air. Mr. Thorne drew a breath, slow and deliberate, as if tasting the very essence of decay. "Ah, Miss Vance," his voice resonated, amplified by the emptiness. "It surpasses even my most vivid imaginings." My practice narrative commenced, a tapestry woven from historical threads and architectural flourishes as I guided him through the echoing chambers. Yet, with each room we traversed, venturing deeper into the house's labyrinthine heart, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Mr. Thorne's questions strayed from the conventional path. The number of bedrooms held less fascination for him than the sheer thickness of the plaster walls. The state of the antique plumbing paled against his pointed inquiries into the basement's fortification. The descent into the cellar was a journey down a throat lined with groaning timbers. Unease escalated to palpable dread. Down here, the air hung heavy and humid, a palpable shroud barely disturbed by the single naked bulb that sculpted more shadow than illumination. And this, I managed, striving for a veneer of professional calm, served as the wine cellar. Quite substantial, you'll find. Mr. Thorne trailed skeletal fingers across the rough-hewn stone, a flicker of profound satisfaction animating his features. Indeed, substantial. And these walls, one presumes they possess considerable density, sufficient perhaps to contain sound. Ice feathered down my spine. Mr. Thorne, I'm uncertain I comprehend. The sharp retort of splintering wood severed my words. We both pivoted. The cellar door, moments before innocuously ajar, stood slammed shut. The decisive click of a heavy lock echoed in the suffocating silence. A beat of stunned stillness. Then Mr. Thorne began to laugh. A low, guttural rumble that vibrated not just in the air, but deep within my bones. "Oh, Miss Vance," he purred, turning fully towards me. The thin veneer of civility had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, predatory hunger in his eyes, his smile now a terrifying crescent. You cannot fathom the patience this moment required. Instinctively, I recoiled, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. "Mr. Thorne, what is this? Stop this. It isn't amusing." He advanced, deliberate steps closing the distance, seeming to feed on the rising tide of my fear. "But it is amusing, Ilara. Terribly so. You see, I've observed you for weeks. Your patterns, your predictable little orbits. I knew you, specifically, you, would be the perfect conduit to bring me here, to this exquisite isolation." My retreat ended abruptly against the cold, unyielding stone. Trapped. The word screamed in my mind. Why? The question tore from my throat, rough and strangled. What is it you want? His grin stretched wider, predatory and absolute. Why? You? Naturally. And the convenient solitude of this magnificent structure, where your screams will simply be absorbed by the thirsty walls. Terror threatened to paralyze, a suffocating wave, yet beneath it, a fierce, primal ember glowed, the will to endure. I would not become another forgotten footnote, a grim anecdote traded among agents. As his arm shot out, aiming to seize me, years of disciplined yoga asserted themselves. I twisted, folding my body impossibly, slipping beneath his grasp, like water through fingers. My feet found the stairs, devouring them two at a time, the frantic rhythm a counterpoint to the enraged curses and heavy footfalls echoing from the depths below. I reached the cellar door, my hand clawing at the unyielding knob, locked fast. Panic surged, a black tide threatening to engulf me, but I shoved it back. I knew this house, its shadowed corners, its hidden passages. There had to be another egress. I burst into the kitchen, adrenaline singing in my veins, my hand snatching a weighty cast iron skillet from the stove as I fled past. A meager shield, perhaps, but infinitely better than bare hands. Thorn's pursuit was relentless, his steps drumming a terrifying cadence, closing the gap with every passing second. I veered into the cavernous dining room, eyes darting, desperately seeking an advantage, a weapon, an escape. The vast bay window, overlooking the overgrown grounds, beckoned. Freedom lay beyond, but it meant abandoning the dubious sanctuary of the house itself. No time for doubt. Summoning every ounce of strength, I swung the heavy skillet, launching it towards the glass. It erupted in a satisfying crescendo of shattering pains. Without hesitation, I plunged through the jagged opening, feeling slivers tear at fabric and flesh. I landed hard on the tangled lawn, the breath punched from my lungs. But adrenaline is a potent elixir. I scrambled upright within seconds, propelled towards the distant wrought iron gates bordering the property. A guttural roar of fury erupted behind me. A backward glance confirmed my terror. Thorn, framed in the shattered window, his face a mask of incandescent rage, he launched himself through the opening with an agility that belied his gaunt frame. My legs pumped harder, lungs searing, the vast expanse of the lawn stretching before me like an eternity. The gates swam into view, my car a small metal promise just beyond them. If I could only reach it. A hand clamped around my ankle like a manacle. I crashed down again, the impact jarring. Thorn was upon me instantly, his weight crushing, pinning me to the damp earth. His hands found my throat, squeezing with brutal, terrifying efficiency. "You ought to have been more cooperative," he snarled, his face inches from mine, breath hot and foul. "Now I shall have to find another playmate." Black constellations bloomed at the periphery of my vision as I fought for air. My free hand scrabbled frantically in the thick grass, fingers searching, desperate for purchase, for leverage, for a weapon. They closed around something solid, cold, dense, a fist-sized rock, relic of some forgotten landscaping endeavor. With the last vestiges of my fading strength, I swung it upwards, connecting with a sickening thud against the side of Thorn's head. He grunted, a sound of pained surprise, his grip momentarily faltering, allowing a precious, ragged gasp of air into my starving lungs. I struck again, harder this time. He groaned and rolled away, clutching his temple. I staggered to my feet, the world tilting violently, but forward momentum was everything. I lurched towards the gates, fingers fumbling in my pocket for the elusive keys. Behind me, Thorn was stirring, his curses escalating as he registered my escape. I reached the car just as he began his renewed charge across the lawn. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I jammed the key towards the lock. "Open, open, damn you," I whispered, eyes flicking between the keyhole and the rapidly approaching figure of madness. The lock clicked. Relief surged as I wrenched the door open, tumbling inside. The engine roared to life before the door was even fully shut. Thorn reached the vehicle just as I slammed the gear stick into reverse. His fists hammered against the driver's side window, the glass fracturing into a spiderweb mosaic, but miraculously holding. I stomped on the accelerator. Tires screamed in protest as I peeled away from the curb, leaving the cursed mansion and its monstrous occupant behind. In the rearview mirror, his figure diminished rapidly, a solitary silhouette raging impotently in the center of the road. His furious shouts dissolved into the frantic thrumming of my own heart. I drove for hours, directionless, propelled by sheer adrenaline, unable to face the prospect of home or the sterile quiet of a police station. Finally, pulling into the brightly lit sanctuary of a 24-hour diner's parking lot, the tremors in my hands refused to subside. I sat gripping the wheel, the silence amplifying the enormity of what had transpired. Then, the dam broke. Sobs tore through me, violent and cathartic, the raw relief of survival mingling with the chilling proximity of death. I'd stared into the abyss and somehow, impossibly, clawed my way back. As the first tentative brushstrokes of dawn painted the eastern sky, a fragile calm settled. I drove to the police station, the fluorescent lights harsh after the preceding darkness. The officers listened, their faces etched with professional sympathy, as I recounted the ordeal, promising pursuit, justice. The days that followed were lived on a knife's edge. Every unexpected shadow held menace. Every sudden noise jolted me back to the cellar's damp chill. The career I had meticulously built, once a source of pride and satisfaction, now felt fraught with potential peril. Each empty house whispered threats. Each new client was scrutinized through a lens of suspicion. Yet, as weeks bled into months and Thorn remained a phantom, a cold resolve began to harden within me. Fear would not be my jailer. I enrolled in self-defense courses, transforming my body into a weapon. My home and car became fortresses, bristling with advanced security. Vigilance became my constant companion. Routines were altered. Client screenings intensified. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to stitch back together the shredded fabric of my security, myself. The ordeal had irrevocably altered the landscape of my inner world. Of that, there was no doubt. But perhaps not all transformations are destructive. Within the crucible of terror, I had unearthed a resilience, a core of strength previously unknown. I had confronted the embodiment of my deepest fears and emerged, scarred but standing. Now, poised outside a new listing, preparing to meet a potential buyer, I drew a deliberate, steadying breath. The fear hadn't vanished. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface now, a permanent resident. But beside it stood a newfound determination. I straightened the lapels of my jacket, smoothed my expression into practiced professionalism, and stepped forward. I was Alara Vance, survivor, purveyor of properties, extraordinary in my endurance, and I was ready for whatever the day held.